At 3 a.m., security cameras captured a woman at her husband's computer while her baby slept nearby. By sunrise, a $500 million empire would have a new queen. When tech CEO Daniel Carter told his wife, "It's just a baby," during their daughter's medical emergency, he thought he was dismissing a hysterical housewife. He had no idea he was talking to a former MIT cybersecurity genius who'd been documenting his crimes for months. What happened next shocked Silicon Valley and changed federal law forever. This incredible story of justice will blow your mind. But first, smash that like button and subscribe, because you won't believe how this mother's digital revolution ends. Let's dive in. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Sarah Mitchell's face as she cradled her 8-month-old daughter, Emma. The baby's lips had finally returned to their natural pink color, but the memory of them turning blue in the car still made Sarah's hands shake. "Mrs. Carter, your daughter is stable now," Dr. Rodriguez said, checking Emma's chart. The allergic reaction was severe. "Another 15 minutes and we might be having a very different conversation." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Her phone showed 17 missed calls to Daniel, her husband of 4 years, 17 desperate attempts to reach the man who was supposed to be her partner, her support system, the father of their child. The phone buzzed. Finally. "Sarah, what's so urgent? I'm literally on stage closing the biggest deal of my career." Daniel's voice carried the familiar edge of irritation that had become his default tone when speaking to her. "Emma stopped breathing," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "She had a severe allergic reaction. We're at Northwood General. I called you 17 times. Jesus. Sarah, you're being dramatic again. Kids get sick. It's what they do. I'm announcing our artificial intelligence partnership with Quantum Corp. This is $50 million we're talking about." Sarah looked down at the tiny IV taped to Emma's arm, at the oxygen monitor still clipped to her daughter's finger. "Daniel, she could have died. She turned blue in my arms." "Look, I'll swing by when I'm done here. Maybe grab some flowers or something. But Sarah, you need to stop calling me during work events. It's embarrassing. People are starting to notice." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, the silence more devastating than any scream. A nurse approached with discharge papers, and Sarah noticed the woman's sympathetic expression. How many times had this stranger witnessed a mother's moment of abandonment? "Is your husband coming to pick you up?" the nurse asked gently. "No," Sarah said, the word tasting like ash. "He's closing a deal." 3 hours later, as Sarah sat in her Tesla in the hospital parking garage, she pulled up Daniel's Instagram. There it was, posted 30 minutes ago during Emma's crisis, a photo of him on stage, arms raised in victory, with the caption, "Closing deals while wifey handles mom duties. When you're building an empire, someone's got to manage the home front. Blessed to have a partner who gets it. Hashtag boss life, hashtag power couple." The comments were a mixture of congratulations and emojis. Sarah scrolled through them, each heart and fire symbol feeling like a slap. She screenshotted the post, though she couldn't say why. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her crib, Sarah sat in their minimalist living room staring at the walls of their Pacific Heights penthouse. The apartment was featured in Architectural Digest 2 years ago, all clean lines and imported Italian marble. Daniel loved showing it off to investors. Sarah had never felt at home in it. She opened her laptop, muscle memory guiding her fingers to a folder buried deep in her files. Inside were documents she hadn't looked at in years, her MIT computer science degree, her cybersecurity certifications, her recommendation letters from professors who'd called her brilliant and revolutionary. Before Daniel, before marriage, before becoming a stay-at-home mom. Sarah Mitchell had been a different person. She'd been the founder of a small but innovative cybersecurity firm, the woman who designed unhackable systems for Fortune 500 companies, the prodigy who'd turned down job offers from Google and Apple because she'd wanted to build something of her own. Then she'd met Daniel Carter at a tech conference. He was magnetic, ambitious, and he'd seemed genuinely impressed by her work. "You and me," he'd said over expensive wine. "We could build something incredible together." But somehow, together had meant Sarah dissolving her company to support his vision. Together had meant her becoming his unpaid advisor while he took credit for her innovations. Together had meant her brilliant mind being reduced to managing household staff and planning dinner parties for his investors. Sarah closed the laptop and walked to Emma's room. Her daughter slept peacefully. Tiny fists curled near her face. Sarah had sacrificed everything for this life, believing it was what family meant. But watching Emma fight for breath while Daniel performed for cameras had shattered something fundamental inside her. She pulled out her phone and opened a secure messaging app she hadn't used in 3 years. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing a simple message, "It's time." The response came within minutes. "We've been waiting." Sarah woke to the sound of Daniel's shower running and the familiar ping of his phone receiving messages. 3 years of marriage had taught her his routines. Shower, protein shake, check stock prices, post motivational quote on LinkedIn, leave for office without saying goodbye. But this morning was different. This morning, Sarah was paying attention. She waited until she heard his Tesla pull out of the underground garage before moving to his home office. Daniel had always been careless with passwords, using the same combination for everything Emma's birthday followed by his lucky number. Sarah had discovered this months ago, but had never acted on it. Now she did. His computer unlocked easily, revealing a desktop cluttered with folders labeled things like Q4 projections and board presentations. But Sarah wasn't interested in the obvious files. Her MIT training had taught her that the real secrets were always hidden deeper. She navigated to his browser history, her stomach dropping as she saw repeated visits to apartment rental sites, luxury one-bedrooms in Soma, all bookmarked, all way too expensive for a single person's salary. A knock at the door interrupted her search. Emma was crying, and Maria, their nanny, had arrived for her shift. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," Maria said, her English careful and precise. "How is little Emma today?" "She's better, thank you," Sarah replied, scooping up her daughter. But as Maria took Emma to the kitchen for breakfast, Sarah noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. Maria always seemed nervous around Daniel, but relaxed and warm with Sarah and Emma. "Maria," Sarah called, following them to the kitchen. "Can I ask you something? Has Mr. Carter ever said anything to you about me, about my mental health?" Maria's hand stilled as she prepared Emma's bottle. "Mrs. Carter, I think you are very good mother, very smart woman. Sometimes I think maybe you too smart for your own good." The careful phrasing told Sarah everything she needed to know. Daniel had been planting seeds, building a narrative. Sarah returned to the office with new urgency. She found what she was looking for in a folder buried inside another folder labeled Personal Insurance. Bank statements for accounts she'd never seen, credit card bills for purchases she hadn't made, restaurant charges for places she'd never been, Chez Laurent $800 for dinner for two, La Bernardin $600. The dates matched Daniel's client meetings perfectly, but the smoking gun was in his email drafts. Messages never sent, but saved, detailing plans with someone named A. The language was intimate, conspiratorial. Sarah's getting suspicious about the Cayman accounts. Need to move faster with the custody prep. Custody prep. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she opened another draft. My lawyer says the mental health angle is our best bet, the postpartum depression narrative, plus the paranoia about business dealings. We need documented incidents. She took screenshots of everything, her hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. 3 years of marriage, and Daniel had been building a case against her the entire time. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee shop on Mission, 2 p.m. Come alone. Sarah stared at the message. The secure app from last night had been just the beginning. Her old MIT contacts weren't just offering emotional support, they were offering something much more valuable. That afternoon, Sarah pushed Emma's stroller into a busy coffee shop in the Mission District, far from her usual Pacific Heights bubble. She spotted him immediately, Tyler Brooks, her college boyfriend turned investigative journalist. He'd been the one responding to her messages. Sarah. Tyler stood, his expression mixing professional concern with personal warmth. You look like I haven't slept in months. Sarah managed a weak smile as she sat across from him, keeping Emma's stroller close. I was going to say strong, Tyler replied quietly. Your message last night was pretty cryptic, but given what we've been investigating about Carter Tech, I had a feeling it was serious. Tyler glanced around the coffee shop before leaning forward. There's a group of us, tech journalists, former employees, a few regulatory contacts. Daniel Carter's been on our radar for 2 years. We just haven't been able to prove anything. What kind of things? Employee pension fund irregularities, unreported offshore accounts, a pattern of acquiring smaller companies, stripping their assets, then dissolving them. And Sarah. Tyler's voice dropped. We think he's been using company funds for personal expenses, including an apartment he keeps downtown. Sarah's stomach lurched. For his mistress. So you know about Amber Hayes. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed made everything real. How long? 8 months. Since just after Emma was born. Sarah looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her stroller. Emma had been born into a lie, surrounded by deception from her first breath. Tyler, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. If someone had evidence of everything you just described, could they stop him? Tyler studied her carefully. What kind of evidence? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him the screenshots from Daniel's computer. Tyler's eyes widened as he scrolled through bank statements and email drafts. Jesus, Sarah, this is everything we've been looking for. But where did you get this? I used to design security systems. Remember, I know how to find what people try to hide. Tyler leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who built unhackable systems for half of Silicon Valley. I should have known you were still in there somewhere. The question is, Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time in months, what do we do with it? Tyler's smile turned predatory. We burn his empire to the ground. The revelation that Sarah's evidence matched Tyler's investigation changed everything. Within 48 hours, Sarah found herself at the center of a careful conspiracy that felt more like a military operation than revenge. Tyler had introduced her to the team Marcus Chen, a former Carter Tech employee who'd been fired for questioning financial irregularities, Detective Lisa Romano, who worked financial crimes and had been building a parallel investigation, and most surprisingly, James Wong, Daniel's current CFO and college roommate. James has been documenting everything for months, Tyler explained as they sat in Marcus's apartment in Oakland, far from Daniel's surveillance network. He's been trying to find a way to blow the whistle without destroying his own career. James looked exhausted. The weight of months of internal conflict etched across his face. Daniel changed after Emma was born, he said quietly. It was like having a child made him feel invincible instead of responsible. He started taking bigger risks, making decisions that put the entire company in jeopardy. The pension fund, Sarah prompted. $3.2 million diverted over 18 months, James confirmed. Officially, it's listed as temporary operational transfers. But the money went to offshore accounts that Daniel controls personally. I have all the documentation. Detective Romano spread papers across Marcus's dining table. We've been building a case, but we needed someone with access to Daniel's personal accounts to tie everything together. Corporate fraud is one thing, but what you found, Sarah, proves intent to defraud and personal enrichment. Sarah studied the timeline they'd constructed. Daniel's affair with Amber Hayes had begun exactly when the financial irregularities started. He'd rented the downtown apartment using company funds routed through a fake consulting contract. The restaurant bills, the jewelry purchases, even Amber's promotion to head of marketing despite having no relevant experience, it was all documented. But there's something else, James said, his voice dropping. Daniel's been talking to divorce lawyers for 3 months. He's planning to file for sole custody of Emma. The room fell silent. Sarah felt the familiar ice in her veins, but this time it was accompanied by something new, calculated fury. On what grounds? She asked. Mental health issues, postpartum depression that's never been treated, paranoid delusions about his business dealings. He's been documenting instances of what he calls erratic behavior. Marcus pulled out a folder. We found some of his notes, times you've questioned company expenses, your reaction to finding Amber's business cards in his jacket pocket, even your insistence on going to the emergency room with Emma. He's calling that erratic behavior. He's building a narrative, Detective Romano said grimly. Wealthy husband with successful company, unstable wife who can't handle the pressure of their lifestyle. It's a story judges have heard before. Sarah looked around the room at these people who had become her unlikely allies. A month ago, she'd been living in isolation, believing herself powerless. Now she was surrounded by evidence, expertise, and determination. What do you need from me? She asked. Tyler and Detective Romano exchanged glances. We need you to go back to being the perfect wife, Tyler said. Make Daniel think he's won. Meanwhile, we're going to gather enough evidence to destroy him professionally and personally. The goal isn't just to stop the fraud, Detective Romano added. It's to make sure he can never use his wealth and connections to escape consequences. And more importantly, to make sure he can never take Emma away from you. That evening, Sarah returned to her penthouse with a performance to deliver. Daniel was home early, which was unusual, and he was in an unusually good mood. There's my beautiful wife, he said, wrapping his arms around her as she entered the kitchen. The gesture felt like a cage. How's our little princess today? She's good. The doctor said she's completely recovered from yesterday. See, I told you it wasn't serious. You worry too much, baby. Daniel's tone was patronizing, the voice of someone speaking to a child. I've been thinking we should take a vacation, just the two of us. Maria can watch Emma for a few days. Sarah forced a smile. That sounds wonderful. Where were you thinking? Napa? I've got some investors with a place up there. Could be good for business, too. Of course, even their imaginary romantic getaway was really about business. Sarah nodded enthusiastically while mentally recording every detail for Tyler's team. Daniel, I owe you an apology for yesterday. You were right, I was being dramatic about Emma. I think I might be dealing with some anxiety issues since she was born. Maybe I should talk to someone. Daniel's eyes lit up with an emotion that looked like triumph. I think that's a great idea, honey. I actually know someone. Dr. Patricia Hendricks. She specializes in postpartum issues. Very discreet. Very professional. You've already looked into therapists for me. I just want you to be happy. Sarah, I want you to be the best mother you can be for Emma. That night, as Daniel slept beside her, Sarah composed a secure message to Tyler. He's already chosen my therapist. Find out everything you can about Dr. Patricia Hendricks. The response came within an hour. Hendricks takes payments from 3 law firms that specialize in custody cases. She's not a therapist. She's a professional witness. Sarah stared at the message, understanding fully for the first time how comprehensive Daniel's plan was. He wasn't just stealing money or having an affair. He was systematically destroying her credibility, her mental health narrative, and her legal standing as Emma's mother. But Daniel had made one critical error. He'd underestimated who Sarah Mitchell really was. She opened her laptop and began typing code for the first time in 3 years. If Daniel wanted to play games with technology and evidence, he was about to discover he'd challenged the wrong woman. The revolution was about to begin. Sarah's return to the digital battlefield felt like putting on armor she'd forgotten she owned. For 3 years, she'd suppressed the part of herself that could build systems, break codes, and navigate the darkest corners of the internet. Now, sitting in Emma's nursery at 2 a.m. while her daughter slept, Sarah let that part of herself fully awaken. The first target was Dr. Patricia Hendricks. Within an hour, Sarah had uncovered the therapist's entire client history, billing records, and most damning of all, a series of emails with family court lawyers discussing optimal therapeutic narratives for custody proceedings. Dr. Hendricks wasn't just ethically compromised, she was running a business that manufactured evidence against mothers. Sarah documented everything, but she didn't stop there. She traced the network of lawyers, judges, and experts who collaborated with Hendricks. What she found was a systematic pipeline designed to separate wealthy fathers from problematic wives. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Tyler. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Daniel's accelerating his timeline. The next morning, Sarah kissed Daniel goodbye as he left for his board meeting, then immediately drove to Marcus's apartment. The atmosphere was tense when she arrived. Tyler looked grim. James appeared to be on the verge of a breakdown, and Detective Romano was pacing like a caged animal. Daniel filed preliminary custody papers yesterday, Tyler said without preamble. Emergency motion claiming you've been having severe mental health episodes and might be a danger to Emma. Sarah's world tilted. That's impossible. I was with him all evening. He used a different law firm, filed in family court while you were home playing the perfect wife. James pulled out a folder. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have seen this coming. Sarah read through the documents, each word carefully crafted to paint her as unstable, paranoid, and potentially dangerous. The evidence included witness statements from Maria the nanny, Dr. Hendricks, and several of Daniel's business associates. Maria would never say these things about me, Sarah said. She didn't, Detective Romano replied. We contacted her this morning. She's never spoken to any lawyers. Her statement was fabricated. How is that legal? It's not, Tyler said. But by the time we prove it's fabricated, Daniel will have temporary custody and possession of all marital assets. The system is designed to protect whoever strikes first. Sarah felt the familiar ice in her veins, but this time it was accompanied by something that surprised her relief. Daniel had just made the first overtly illegal move in their shadow war. Now she could respond with full force. How long do we have? The emergency hearing is in 72 hours, Detective Romano said. Daniel's betting that you'll panic. Maybe do something that actually looks unstable. He wants you to validate his narrative. Sarah stood up and walked to Marcus's computer. Can I borrow this for the next 4 hours? Sarah worked in silence while the others watched. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing systems, cross-referencing databases, and building something that made Tyler whistle in appreciation. What are you doing? James asked. I'm building a digital fortress, Sarah replied without looking up. Daniel thinks he understands technology because he can give PowerPoint presentations about artificial intelligence. He's about to learn the difference between talking about tech and actually understanding it. By evening, Sarah had accomplished something that would have taken most cybersecurity firms weeks to complete. She'd created an unbreachable repository of evidence, backed up across multiple secure servers, with automated distribution protocols that would trigger if anyone tried to tamper with the files. But more importantly, she'd gained access to Daniel's real digital life. Tyler, I need you to see this, Sarah called. On the screen was Daniel's actual financial picture. The Carter tech empire that looked so successful from the outside was built on a foundation of debt, creative accounting, and systematic theft. The company was 3 months away from bankruptcy, hidden behind shell corporations and fraudulent investor reports. He's been stealing from everyone, Sarah explained. Employees, investors, even his own board of directors. The offshore accounts aren't just for hiding assets, they're preparing for the company's collapse. James leaned over her shoulder, his face pale. These numbers, if this is accurate, Carter Tech is insolvent. We're technically bankrupt. It gets worse, Sarah continued, opening another file. Daniel's been negotiating with Chinese investors to sell the company's proprietary AI technology that was developed using federal defense contracts. Detective Romano's expression darkened. That's not just fraud. That's potentially treason. Sarah turned to face the group. Daniel isn't just planning to divorce me and steal Emma. He's planning to loot the company, disappear with Amber and millions of dollars, and leave everyone else holding the bag. The custody battle is just his way of keeping me distracted while he executes his exit strategy. The room fell silent as the full scope of Daniel's betrayal became clear. This wasn't a marriage falling apart. It was an elaborate heist with Sarah and Emma as collateral damage. So what do we do? Marcus asked. Sarah's smile was cold and sharp. We're going to beat him at his own game, but first, we're going to make sure he can never run. She turned back to the computer and began typing. Tyler, I need you to contact that federal prosecutor you mentioned, Detective Romano. I need you to coordinate with financial crimes. James, you're going to help me build a firewall around the employee pension funds. And Daniel, Tyler asked. Daniel is going to wake up tomorrow thinking he's won everything. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late. Sarah's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. For 3 years, she'd been playing defense, protecting herself and Emma from Daniel's manipulation. Now it was time to go on the offense. The revolution had begun in earnest. The family court hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected competence without threatening anyone's masculine insecurities. She'd learned to play these games during her tech career, and now Emma's future depended on her performance. Daniel was already there with his legal team, 3 men in expensive suits who looked like they could buy and sell judges for breakfast. His lawyer, Richard Blackstone, was legendary for destroying women in custody battles. Mrs. Carter. Blackstone approached her with a predatory smile. I hope you've had time to consider our offer. Your husband is prepared to be very generous with visitation rights if we can resolve this quickly. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I'm looking forward to our hearing. Mr. Blackstone, The judge, Honorable Margaret Webb, was known for her no-nonsense approach and her impatience with frivolous emergency motions. Sarah had researched her extensively. Judge Webb had 2 daughters of her own and a history of skepticism toward wealthy men who suddenly discovered their wives were unstable. "Mr. Blackstone," Judge Webb began, "you've filed an emergency motion claiming Mrs. Carter poses an immediate danger to the minor child. That's a serious allegation that requires serious evidence." "Your Honor, we have documented proof of Mrs. Carter's declining mental state, paranoid accusations about my client's business practices, erratic behavior during medical emergencies, and concerning statements about feeling trapped in her marriage." Sarah's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender named David Kim, began to object, but Sarah touched his arm gently. They discussed strategy. Sometimes the best defense was letting your opponent overplay their hand. Blackstone presented his evidence, the fabricated statement from Maria, Dr. Hendricks's professional opinion about Sarah's mental state, and testimony from Daniel's business associates about her increasingly bizarre questions about company finances. Judge Webb listened impassively, occasionally glancing at Sarah, who remained calm and composed throughout the presentation. "Mrs. Carter," Judge Webb finally said, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Sarah stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present some evidence of my own." David Kim looked surprised. This wasn't part of their discussed strategy. But Sarah had made a decision during Blackstone's presentation. Half measures wouldn't save Emma. "Your Honor, my husband claims I've been making paranoid accusations about his business practices. I'd like to submit financial records that prove those accusations were accurate." She handed a folder to the bailiff. Inside were bank statements, email evidence, and financial analyses that painted a clear picture of Daniel's fraud. But Sarah had been careful. Nothing in the folder revealed the illegal methods she'd used to obtain the information. Judge Webb's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the documents. "Mr. Blackstone, are you aware that your client is under federal investigation for financial fraud?" The courtroom erupted. Daniel's face went white, and Blackstone began frantically whispering with his client. "Your Honor," Blackstone stammered, "we have no knowledge of any federal investigation. These documents appear to be illegally obtained. They were obtained through legitimate financial disclosure requests filed by concerned employees." Sarah interrupted smoothly. "Which is public record as of yesterday morning." Judge Webb's expression had shifted from skeptical to interested. "Mrs. Carter, you're claiming your husband's accusations of paranoia were actually attempts to discredit your legitimate concerns about criminal activity?" "Yes, Your Honor. I believe my husband filed for emergency custody to prevent me from cooperating with federal investigators." It was a masterful pivot. Sarah had turned Daniel's attack into evidence of his guilt. Judge Webb looked at Daniel directly. "Mr. Carter, I'm denying the emergency custody motion. Furthermore, I'm ordering both parties to submit to psychological evaluations by court-appointed experts, not private practitioners with potential conflicts of interest." As they left the courthouse, Daniel grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed. "I protected our daughter from a criminal." Sarah replied loudly enough for his lawyers to hear. That evening, Sarah sat in her kitchen feeding Emma while Daniel raged in his office. She could hear him making phone calls, his voice rising with each conversation. The federal investigation she'd mentioned in court had become real the moment she'd submitted the evidence. Tyler's prosecutor contact had been waiting for exactly this documentation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. "It's done. FBI will execute search warrants tomorrow morning. Financial Crimes Division is freezing all accounts connected to the offshore network." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was happily mashing bananas between her tiny fingers. "Daddy's going to have a bad day tomorrow, sweetheart, but you'll be safe." Around midnight, Sarah heard Daniel's car leave the garage. She waited 15 minutes, then accessed his home computer one final time. His browser history showed desperate searches, fleeing country with frozen assets, custody rights from international locations, and most telling, how long before wire transfers complete. Daniel was running. Sarah opened the secure communication app and sent a single message. He's making his move. Time for phase 2. The response was immediate. We're ready. Get Emma to safety. Sarah looked around the penthouse that had been her prison for 3 years. Tomorrow morning, federal agents would search every inch of this place. Daniel would be arrested. His empire would collapse, and Sarah would finally be free. But first, she had to make sure Emma was protected from the storm that was coming. She packed a small bag, lifted her sleeping daughter from her crib, and walked out of the penthouse for the last time. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The revolution was entering its final phase. Sarah woke in Marcus's guest bedroom to the sound of sirens wailing through Oakland. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching instinctively for Emma before remembering her daughter was sleeping safely in a travel crib nearby. Her phone buzzed with messages from Tyler. FBI raided the penthouse at 6 a.m. Daniel wasn't there. Search warrants executed at Carter Tech offices. Financial accounts frozen as of midnight. Sarah crept out of the bedroom and found Tyler, Marcus, and Detective Romano huddled around a laptop in the kitchen, watching news coverage on multiple screens. "Good morning, revolutionary," Tyler said without looking up. "Your husband is officially a federal fugitive." On screen, a CNN reporter stood outside Carter Tech's gleaming headquarters while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence to waiting vans. The ticker read, "Tech CEO missing as federal fraud investigation unfolds." "Where is he?" Sarah asked. "Best guess he made it to the airport before the asset freeze kicked in," Detective Romano replied. "But he's not getting far. Interpol has been alerted. All his credit cards are frozen, and his passport's been flagged." Marcus pulled up another news feed. "It gets better. Amber Hayes was arrested this morning trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of cash and a fake passport." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction watching Amber's perp walk on the news. The woman who'd helped Daniel plan to steal Emma was now facing federal conspiracy charges. "What about the employees?" Sarah asked. "And the pension fund?" "That's the beautiful part," Tyler said, grinning. James filed emergency injunctions to protect all employee assets before the FBI raid. The pension fund is safe, and the court appointed an independent administrator to manage company operations during the investigation. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but Tyler nodded they'd been expecting this call. "Sarah, it's James. I'm at the office with federal prosecutors. They want to interview you as soon as possible. You're being classified as a whistleblower witness, which means federal protection for you and Emma." "Protection from what?" "Daniel made some phone calls before he disappeared. Threats against you, specifically. The FBI is taking them very seriously." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was babbling happily in her travel crib, oblivious to the chaos surrounding her. A month ago, Sarah had been a trapped housewife. Now she was a federal witness under protection from her own husband. "I'll be there in an hour," she told James. The FBI field office was buzzing with activity when Sarah arrived. Agent Patricia Suarez, a serious woman in her 40s, led Sarah to a conference room where the evidence from Daniel's office was spread across multiple tables. "Mrs. Carter, we need to understand exactly how you obtained this financial information." Agent Suarez began. Sarah had prepared for this question. "I used my computer science background to analyze patterns in documents that were already accessible to me as Daniel's wife. Bank statements, credit card bills, things I had legitimate access to. It was technically true, even if it omitted the more sophisticated hacking she'd done. Tyler had coached her on walking this legal tightrope. The evidence you provided has been invaluable, Agent Suarez continued. We've uncovered a fraud scheme worth over $50 million. Your husband was also attempting to sell classified technology to foreign entities. Classified technology. Carter Tech held several defense contracts for AI development. The technology your husband was attempting to sell could have compromised national security. Sarah felt a chill. Daniel hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been committing treason. Where do things stand legally? Sarah asked. Your husband is facing multiple federal charges: wire fraud, money laundering, theft of classified information, and conspiracy. If convicted, he's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Agent Suarez paused, studying Sarah carefully. There's something else. We found evidence that your husband was planning to take Emma out of the country. Fake passports, offshore accounts in her name, travel reservations. Mrs. Carter, I believe he was planning to kidnap your daughter. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She'd known Daniel was planning to use Emma as leverage, but the idea that he would simply disappear with her daughter was almost too horrible to process. However, Agent Suarez continued, thanks to your evidence and cooperation, we were able to prevent that. You saved your daughter's life, Mrs. Carter. That afternoon, Sarah returned to Marcus's apartment to find Emma napping and Tyler glued to his laptop. Daniel's been arrested, he announced. Airport in Mexico City. Apparently, he thought he could charm his way past international law enforcement. On screen was footage of Daniel in handcuffs, looking haggard and desperate, nothing like the confident tech mogul who dismissed his daughter's medical emergency just a week ago. The media is calling you the Silicon Valley whistleblower, Tyler added. 3 different publishers want to buy your story, and there's talk of a documentary. Sarah barely heard him. She was watching Emma sleep, thinking about how close she'd come to losing her daughter forever. Daniel's plan had been comprehensive and ruthless. He'd been willing to destroy everyone in his path for money and power, but he'd underestimated the one person he'd spent 3 years systematically undervaluing: his wife. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Suarez. Judge Webb wants to see you tomorrow regarding permanent custody arrangements. Bring a good lawyer. Sarah smiled. For the first time in 3 years, she was looking forward to a court hearing. The revolution was nearly complete. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the boardroom of what was now Mitchell Technologies, looking out at San Francisco Bay through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun painted the water gold, and she could see early commuters crossing the Bay Bridge in the distance. The quarterly reports look excellent, James said, closing his laptop. As the company's new chief operating officer, he'd helped Sarah navigate the complex process of rebuilding Carter Tech from the ashes of Daniel's fraud. Employee satisfaction is up 60%, and we've won 3 major contracts since the rebranding. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on Emma, who was playing contentedly in the corner of the boardroom with blocks while wearing tiny noise-canceling headphones. At 14 months old, Emma was walking confidently and had become the unofficial mascot of Mitchell Technologies. The cybersecurity division is ahead of projections, Marcus added. He'd been promoted to vice president of digital security, his experience as a whistleblower making him invaluable in building ethical corporate practices. Companies are specifically seeking us out because of our reputation for transparency. It had been Tyler's idea to transform the company into something completely different from Daniel's empire. Instead of chasing maximum profit through questionable practices, Mitchell Technologies focused on ethical AI development and cybersecurity services for companies that prioritize transparency. What's the status on the employee ownership program? Sarah asked. Final paperwork should be complete next month, James replied. Every employee will own shares in the company they're helping to build. No more corporate overlords making unilateral decisions. Sarah had insisted on the employee ownership structure from the beginning. She'd seen what happened when power was concentrated in the hands of someone like Daniel. Her company would be different. A knock at the boardroom door interrupted the meeting. Tyler entered, followed by Agent Suarez and a woman Sarah didn't recognize. "Sarah, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez," Agent Suarez said. "She's here with news about Daniel's case." Sarah's stomach tightened. Even though Daniel had been in federal custody for months, part of her still feared he might find a way to escape consequences. "Mrs. Mitchell," Attorney Martinez began, using Sarah's returned maiden name. "I wanted to inform you personally that your ex-husband has accepted a plea agreement. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15 years. Sarah felt Emma's hand grab her leg as her daughter pulled herself upright. "What about the threats he made against us?" "Part of the plea agreement includes a permanent restraining order and forfeiture of all parental rights." Attorney Martinez continued. "He will have no legal claim to Emma and no right to contact either of you." Sarah picked up Emma, who immediately began playing with her mother's necklace. For months, Sarah had been looking over her shoulder, afraid that Daniel would somehow find a way to hurt them even from prison. Now, finally, they were truly free. "There's one more thing," Agent Suarez added. "The recovery of assets from your ex-husband's fraud scheme has been completed. As the primary whistleblower and victim, you're entitled to a substantial portion of the recovered funds." Sarah had been expecting this conversation. Under federal whistleblower protection laws, she was entitled to compensation for her role in exposing Daniel's crimes. "How much?" she asked. $12 million. Attorney Martinez replied. "Plus the federal government is recommending you for a civilian commendation for preventing the theft of classified technology." Sarah stared at them, the number almost incomprehensible. A year ago, she'd been a trapped housewife with no independent resources. Now she was a millionaire CEO with a federal commendation. "The money will be useful for Emma's future," Sarah said finally, "and for making sure this company continues to do things the right way." After the lawyers left, Sarah sat alone in the boardroom with Emma, processing the magnitude of how much their lives had changed. Her daughter would grow up in a world where her mother was respected, independent, and powerful, everything Sarah had wanted for herself but had given up in her marriage to Daniel. Tyler returned an hour later with coffee and a grin. "So, how does it feel to be officially rich and officially vindicated?" "Overwhelming," Sarah admitted. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I was convinced I'd lost everything that mattered to me. Instead, you built something better," Tyler pointed out. "You saved your daughter, stopped a criminal, and created a company that actually helps people. That's a pretty impressive revolution." Sarah looked around the her boardroom, and then down at Emma, who was babbling happily while building towers with her blocks. "You know what the funny thing is," Sarah said. "Daniel always said he was building an empire, but empires fall. What we've built here is something different. It's a community." Tyler raised his coffee cup in a toast to communities and to mothers who refuse to let anyone dismiss their children as just a baby. Sarah clinked her cup against his, smiling as Emma clapped her hands in delight at the sound. The revolution was complete. But more importantly, the future was just beginning. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, tech industry leaders, and policymakers as Sarah approached the witness table. Her testimony about corporate fraud and the need for stronger whistleblower protections had drawn national attention. transforming her from a local news story into a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption. Mrs. Mitchell, Committee Chairwoman Senator Rebecca Torres, began. Thank you for appearing before the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Your experience has highlighted serious gaps in our financial oversight systems. Sarah adjusted the microphone, aware of the cameras focused on her. Emma was with Maria in the gallery, playing quietly while wearing her tiny headphones. At 18 months old, Emma had become accustomed to accompanying her mother to important meetings. Thank you, Senator Torres. I'm here because what happened to my family happens to thousands of families every year. Corporate executives use their wealth and power to manipulate legal systems, destroy evidence, and silence victims. We need stronger protections for the people who speak up. For the next 3 hours, Sarah detailed how Daniel had systematically defrauded investors, employees, and his own family. She explained how the existing legal framework had made it nearly impossible for victims to seek justice without risking their own financial security. The current system protects wealth over truth, Sarah testified. My ex-husband was able to steal millions of dollars and almost succeed in fleeing the country with my daughter because he understood that the legal system favors whoever can afford the best lawyers and the most elaborate lies. Senator Michael Bradley, known for his pro-business stance, challenged Sarah's recommendations. Mrs. Mitchell, don't you think your proposals would create an adversarial relationship between businesses and their employees? Sarah's response was calm but firm. Senator, I think honest businesses have nothing to fear from transparency requirements. The only companies that oppose stronger oversight are the ones that have something to hide. The hearing room erupted in applause, and Sarah saw Tyler in the press gallery, giving her a thumbs up. After the hearing, Sarah was approached by a woman she'd been hoping to meet, Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the therapist who had participated in Daniel's custody scheme. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Hendricks said nervously, I wanted to apologize personally for my role in what happened to you. I've lost my license, and I'm facing criminal charges, but I know that doesn't undo the harm I caused. Sarah studied the woman who had nearly helped Daniel steal Emma. Dr. Hendricks looked genuinely remorseful, but Sarah had learned to be skeptical of people who only felt sorry after facing consequences. Dr. Hendricks, I appreciate your apology, but you need to understand that you weren't just helping my ex-husband commit fraud. You were helping him kidnap my daughter. That's not a professional mistake. That's a crime against a child. Dr. Hendricks nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. I've been cooperating fully with federal investigators to help them understand how widespread this network is. There are dozens of other cases, other families that were destroyed by this system. Sarah felt a familiar surge of protective anger. How many other mothers lost their children because of fake expert testimony? At least 30 cases that we've identified so far. The FBI is reopening all of them. That evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room overlooking the Capitol building, feeding Emma while watching news coverage of her testimony. The story had broken beyond the usual tech industry media. Major networks were covering it as a broader story about corporate accountability and family justice. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from San Francisco. Sarah, it's James. You need to see the news. Amber Hayes just agreed to testify against 2 more executives who were involved in similar schemes. Your congressional testimony triggered a cascade of new revelations. Sarah switched to a news channel where a reporter was standing outside the federal courthouse in San Francisco. This is becoming a nationwide investigation into corporate fraud networks that target the families of whistleblowers, the reporter said. What started as one woman's fight to protect her daughter has exposed a systematic abuse of legal and financial systems across multiple industries. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleepily finishing her bottle. Her daughter would grow up in a world where Sarah's testimony had helped protect other families from similar attacks. The Senate committee wants to invite you back for a follow-up hearing next month, James continued. They're drafting legislation they're calling the Mitchell Protection Act. It would create federal protections for families of corporate whistleblowers. Sarah smiled at the irony. Daniel had tried to use the legal system to destroy her. Instead, she was helping to change that system to protect future victims. James, I want you to set up a meeting with Senator Torres. I have an idea for how Mitchell Technologies can help implement these new protections. What kind of idea? Sarah looked out at the lights of Washington, D.C., thinking about all the other mothers who might be fighting similar battles right now. We're going to build a platform that makes it impossible for corporate criminals to hide their tracks. A system that automatically backs up evidence, connects whistleblowers with legal resources, and creates permanent records that can't be destroyed or manipulated. That sounds ambitious. Good, Sarah replied. Ambitious is exactly what we need to be. As she hung up the phone, Emma fell asleep in her arms. Sarah carried her daughter to the hotel room's window, looking out at the city where laws were made and justice was supposed to be served. Tomorrow, she would fly back to San Francisco and continue building the company that was helping to reshape an entire industry. But tonight, she was simply a mother holding her child, grateful for how far they'd both come. The revolution had become something bigger than either of them. It had become a movement. 2 years after Daniel's arrest, Sarah stood on the stage of the annual Tech Ethics Summit in Austin, looking out at an audience of 3,000 technology leaders, policymakers, and journalists. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the Mitchell Technologies logo alongside statistics that still amazed her: 0 data breaches, 98% employee satisfaction, and $500 million in ethical AI contracts. When I testified before Congress 2 years ago, Sarah began, I talked about the need to protect families from corporate predators. Today, I want to talk about something bigger. The responsibility we all have to build technology that serves humanity instead of exploiting it. In the front row, Emma sat with Maria, now officially Emma's nanny and part of their extended family. At 2.5 years old, Emma was fascinated by the lights and sounds of the conference, occasionally waving at her mother on stage. Mitchell Technologies was built on a simple principle: transparency creates trust, and trust creates sustainable success. We publish our financial reports in real time. Every employee owns equity in the company. Our AI systems are designed with built-in ethical constraints that cannot be overridden for profit. The audience applauded, but Sarah knew the real test wasn't in conference rooms, it was in the marketplace. Mitchell Technologies was now competing directly with companies that prioritized profit over principles, and they were winning. The old model of technology development was based on the idea that innovation required secrecy, that progress demanded accepting harmful consequences, and that wealth justified any means necessary to acquire it. We've proven that model wrong. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the new CEO of a major social media platform that was trying to rebuild its reputation after a series of privacy scandals. Ms. Mitchell, my board has authorized me to make you an offer. We want to acquire Mitchell Technologies for $2 billion. You would remain as CEO, but with the resources to scale your ethical AI platform globally. Sarah considered the offer. $2 billion would make her one of the wealthiest women in technology, and it would give her the resources to implement her vision on a massive scale. Dr. Rodriguez, I appreciate the offer, but Mitchell Technologies isn't for sale. We're building something that can't be bought. Everything has a price. Ms. Mitchell. Sarah smiled. thinking of Daniel's similar confidence in his ability to buy and manipulate whatever he wanted. No, Dr. Rodriguez, some things don't, like integrity, like family, like the knowledge that you've built something that makes the world better instead of worse. That evening, Sarah attended the Summit's Awards dinner, where she was receiving the Technology Ethics Leadership Award. Tyler, now a senior investigative reporter for the Washington Post, was covering the event. "How does it feel to be the most famous tech whistleblower in America?" Tyler asked during a brief interview. "I'd rather be known as the CEO who proved that ethical business practices are profitable business practices," Sarah replied. "The whistleblowing was just the beginning. The real work has been building something better." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out at the Austin skyline while Emma slept in her stroller beside her. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. "The B Corp certification is official. We're now legally required to prioritize social and environmental impact alongside profit." Sarah smiled. Mitchell Technologies had become a certified B Corporation, joining a growing movement of companies that were legally committed to considering their impact on all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your success. I always knew you were brilliant. D." Sarah stared at the message, her blood turning cold. Daniel was supposed to be in federal prison for the next 20 years. How was he sending her messages? She immediately called Agent Suarez, who answered on the second ring. "Agent Suarez, I just received a message from Daniel. I thought all his communications were monitored." "They are, Mrs. Mitchell. That message didn't come from your ex-husband. It came from a reporter who's been investigating prison communication systems. We've been tracking similar messages sent to other high-profile victims. It appears someone is impersonating your ex-husband to cause psychological distress." Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. Even from prison, Daniel's crimes were still creating ripple effects. "The good news," Agent Suarez continued, "is that we've identified the source. It's a former business associate of your ex-husband who's trying to write a book about the case. He'll be facing charges for harassment and impersonation." After hanging up, Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had once surrounded her birth. Her daughter would grow up knowing that her mother had faced down threats and emerged stronger, that justice was possible even against overwhelming odds. Sarah deleted the fake message and opened her laptop. She had work to do, a new AI ethics framework to review, a congressional testimony to prepare, and a company to run that was proving every day that success didn't require sacrificing your soul. The revolution had become an evolution, and Sarah Mitchell was just getting started. 5 years after that terrible night in the emergency room, Sarah Mitchell stood in the same hospital where Emma's crisis had started her journey. But this time, she was there for a celebration, the opening of the Mitchell Family Crisis Center, a facility dedicated to supporting families facing medical emergencies while dealing with domestic abuse or financial manipulation. "Emma, stay close to Mommy," Sarah called as her 5-year-old daughter ran excitedly around the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Emma had grown into a confident, curious child who showed no signs of the trauma from her infancy. She was fascinated by her mother's work and often asked when she could help with the computers. Dr. Rodriguez, the same doctor who had treated Emma that first night, approached Sarah with a warm smile. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to tell you, in 30 years of emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like this. A crisis center specifically designed to help families escape the kind of manipulation your family endured. It's revolutionary." The center was designed to provide immediate legal aid, financial counseling, and security services for families in crisis. It was staffed by lawyers, social workers, cybersecurity experts, and medical professionals who understood that family emergencies were often complicated by abusive relationships and financial control. Dr. Rodriguez, do you remember what you told me that night 5 years ago? You said Emma would have been in serious danger if I'd waited any longer to bring her in. I remember. Well, there are hundreds of mothers right now who are afraid to seek medical help for their children because they know it will trigger retaliation from abusive partners. This center is designed to make sure that never happens again. Tyler approached them, now wearing a Pulitzer Prize pin on his jacket for his series on corporate whistleblowing. Sarah, the senator is ready for your remarks. Sarah walked to the podium set up outside the center's main entrance. The crowd included politicians, tech industry leaders, medical professionals, and most importantly, families who had already been helped by the center during its pilot program. 5 years ago, my daughter Emma nearly died while my ex-husband was celebrating a business deal. Sarah began. When I called him 17 times begging for help, he told me it was just a baby having a tantrum. Those 4 words changed everything, not just for Emma and me, but ultimately for thousands of families across the country. She could see Emma in the front row, sitting on Maria's lap and playing with a tablet designed specifically for children, one of Mitchell Technology's newest products that taught kids about digital safety and ethics. What I learned that night was that abusers don't just control their victims through violence or emotional manipulation. They control them through information, through resources, through the legal system itself. They make their victims believe that seeking help will only make things worse. Sarah paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. She recognized several women she'd met through her advocacy work, mothers who had escaped similar situations, entrepreneurs who had survived corporate retaliation, daughters who were building lives free from their abusers' control. The Mitchell Family Crisis Center represents a different approach. When someone walks through these doors, they're not just getting medical care or legal advice. They're getting access to a network of people who understand that family safety requires economic independence, legal protection, and technological security. The center's services included emergency financial accounts that couldn't be accessed by abusive partners, secure communication systems for coordinating with lawyers and social workers, and temporary housing designed specifically for families fleeing manipulation and control. But most importantly, Sarah continued, this center represents the idea that victims don't have to fight their battles alone, that there are people who will believe them, support them, and help them build new lives free from fear. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself in the center's computer lab, where Emma was excitedly explaining how tablets worked to a group of children whose families were staying in the center's temporary housing program. Mommy makes computers that help people, Emma announced proudly. And someday I'm going to make computers that help animals. Sarah smiled, thinking about how her daughter's life had been shaped by witnessing her mother turn a moment of powerlessness into a force for change. Emma would grow up knowing that standing up to bullies was possible, that justice was achievable, and that helping others was the most important work anyone could do. Tyler joined Sarah in watching the children. You know what's amazing about all this? Daniel thought he was so smart, so powerful. He believed he could manipulate and control everyone around him indefinitely. And instead, his cruelty created something he never could have imagined. Sarah replied, a movement that's protected hundreds of families and changed how we think about corporate accountability. As the day wound down, Sarah and Emma walked through the center's halls, past offices where lawyers were helping mothers establish independent financial accounts, past counseling rooms where children were learning that their parents' conflicts weren't their fault, past secure computer terminals where women were documenting abuse with the kind of precision Sarah had used to build her case against Daniel. "Mommy," Emma said as they reached the center's main lobby, "why did Daddy try to hurt us?" It was a question Emma asked periodically, and Sarah had learned to answer it honestly but age-appropriately. Some people get so focused on having power over others that they forget how to love, Sarah explained. Daddy forgot that being a parent means protecting your family, not controlling them. But you remembered, Emma said confidently. Yes, sweetheart, I remembered. That evening, as they sat in their home in Marin County, a place Sarah had chosen for its excellent schools and sense of community rather than its status value, Sarah read Emma a bedtime story about a princess who saved her kingdom not through magic or marriage, but through intelligence and determination. After Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat in her home office, reviewing reports from Mitchell Technologies' latest projects. The company was now valued at over $3 billion. But more importantly, it employed over 2,000 people who owned equity in their workplace and had meaningful input in company decisions. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Suarez. Annual update. Daniel has had his parole eligibility extended due to violations of prison communication rules. Still attempting to contact former business associates and victims. Earliest possible release now projected at 2045. Sarah deleted the message without emotion. Daniel had become irrelevant to her life. A cautionary tale she sometimes shared in congressional testimony, but not someone who occupied space in her daily thoughts. What mattered was the future she and Emma were building together, a future where technology served humanity, where families had support systems that couldn't be manipulated by wealth or power, and where a mother's love for her child could quite literally change the world. Sarah opened her laptop and began working on her next project, a global initiative to provide cybersecurity resources for domestic violence shelters. Because the revolution that had started with 4 cruel words, "It's just a baby," was far from over. There were still mothers who needed help, still children who needed protection, and still systems that needed to be challenged and changed. And Sarah Mitchell, former victim turned CEO turned advocate, was just getting started. In the 5 years since Daniel Carter's arrest, the Mitchell Protection Act has been passed into federal law, providing enhanced protections for corporate whistleblowers and their families. The Mitchell Family Crisis Center model has been replicated in 12 major cities across the United States. Mitchell Technologies continues to lead the tech industry in ethical AI development and employee ownership models. Daniel Carter is serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison and will not be eligible for parole until 2040. Emma Mitchell, now 5 years old, is thriving in kindergarten and has expressed interest in both computer programming and veterinary medicine. Sarah Mitchell continues to testify before Congress on issues of corporate accountability and family protection. She has declined multiple acquisition offers for Mitchell Technologies, stating that some things are more valuable than money. When asked in a recent interview what advice she would give to other mothers facing similar situations, Sarah replied, "Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that the people who try to make you feel powerless are usually the ones who are most afraid of your actual power. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be silenced.